For the first step of the enclosure, we're going to need these two long beams from box B1. And from our toolbox, there's a bag labeled Enclosure Accessories. There should be two flat square pieces like these, and they have a threaded hole in the one end. And we also need M4 by 20 screws. Now, these M4 by 20 screws are going to screw through these drilled holes here. On one side, there's kind of a countersink larger hole, and on the other, that countersink piece doesn't exist. So just make sure that you're putting the screw through this side so that the head can go all the way into the rail like that. And then we're going to end up screwing into the hole on the side of these little plates. So the plate will be sticking out of the slot like that when we're done. So it should look something like that when you're done. And you'll just repeat it for the other long rail here as well. So after step one, we're left with the two beams here with these little tabs kind of facing into the enclosure, facing each other. In the box where we got the beams from, so box B1, there's also these corner pieces. Now they're kind of flat on one side and hollow on the other, if that makes sense. So they're going to go hollow side facing up. They have these little notches in them to help center them and align them on the ends of these beams. So it kind of like fits in like that. And then through this little cutout right here, we're going to screw into the center of each of these beams. We'll need 4 of these, one for each corner, of course. And we're going to use the M5 by 20 screws that we were using before to secure those. So back in the B1 box, we have 2 more beams here. One of them has holes drilled in it in the sides, so this one doesn't. So this will be the front. The back one has holes drilled in it. Now the manual says make sure the holes are facing up, or that they're oriented vertically, but it has a set of holes here and a further set of holes here, and they're facing different directions. So I can't make them all face up at the same time. It happens to point towards the center of the beam when it's identifying the holes, so I'm assuming they're going to talk about these two. So I'm going to start by orienting those vertically, and I'm just going to attach this the same way we did the other rails with one of those M5 by 20s. Now, the front and the back can be determined by those little tabs that we had installed previously. Those tabs are towards the front of the machine, so this back rail is going to get installed, further away from those. Okay, and with the back rail installed, we're now going to install a front rail in the same fashion. Just make sure it's fully seated in those corners, and then 1 screw in either end. So step 5, we're now going to install the uprights. So in the same box, B1, these are labeled. We're looking for column 1 here. Column 1, if you're facing the front of the enclosure, which you are, is going to go on the front left corner. So that'll be this one over here. And it even tells you that this is the up direction. So this is going to sit on that corner bracket that we just installed, like that. And then we're going to bolt up under through the bottom of this corner with M5 by 30 screws. There's 2 of them, so those are going to go into these threaded holes here. So we'll do that for column 1. So now we're going to install column 2, which facing the front of the enclosure is the front right-hand corner. This has a Hall effect sensor in it, pre-installed. Again, it's got the sticker for column 2 and which direction is up, so we're going to bolt through here with 2 more of those M5 by 30 screws. And step 8, we're going to do the last upright. I'm going to call out my mistake here. Column 3, I had installed it on the rear left corner here. It should be going on the rear right. I'm facing the wrong way. I got my left and right screwed up. So now column 4, the last column, we're going to put it on the last corner in the same way we did the other ones. And this corner is the rear left corner. So step 9 is just saying to check everything. It gives you pictures of all the uprights to make sure you have them at the right corners. And also, once again, it points right here and says to make sure that the holes are facing up. So again, I'm hoping that it's these center holes and not these side holes here that they're talking about. So these are the plastic panels. I've already got one in here, and I've taken the protective film off of both sides of the panels because I figure it's going to be easier to do that now than later. So just be careful that you don't scratch them when you're installing them. So these side panels, you can identify them by this little notch here. The notch goes towards the rear of the machine, so since the hinges are there, this is again the back. So just install them on both sides and make sure that that notch is at the rear. Okay. Step 11, we've removed the top panel from the box with our panels. It's already largely pre-assembled for us, and I've removed all of the protective film on the underside here. Now, in our parts box, where we've been getting all our screws from, we've got these 2 pieces here. They have these little fingers, and they are going to get installed on these little screw holes on the one end. So if we put it like that, we'll be able to bolt down through this center hole, and we're going to do that using M3 by 20 bolts. So now these two pieces here are towards what would be considered the rear of the enclosure. And since I have my enclosure with the rear facing me, I can just kind of lift this up and put it on top. Once we've lifted this on top, you can make sure that each of the upright columns here kind of fits into the little notches in these corner pieces, which helps align everything. And those two black plastic pieces we just screwed in a moment ago fit into those little notches that are cut out of the side of the plastic here, right, at the back of the machine. We're going to need 8 M5 by 30 bolts that are going to bolt down through here to secure the corners and this whole top piece to those upright columns. So we have the enclosure top all bolted in, and now we're on step 13. So we're going to start connecting some electrical connectors here. So we have two. One's a 3-pin and a 2-pin. They only go in one direction. And in the top here, there'll be a 3-pin and a 2-pin hole. And just make sure that they're fully seated in there. So now I'm inside the enclosure through the back. I'm facing the front here. Opposite of the hinge, we have more electrical connections. This one's kind of tangled there. So this just plugs into here, and just make sure you got it going in the right way. So step 14, we're going to install the handle here onto the door. So the handle came out of box B1. The door panel here came out of box B5. There's only 2 panels left. We've got the front door and we've got the back plastic. And so we're dealing with the front door. That's the one with the gasket foam material on the other side and these 2 kind of metal black bars down the sides here. And there's 2 holes here that the handle is going to bolt through. We're going to bolt through with M4 by 12 millimeters flathead screws, or these tapered screws. And it doesn't matter which orientation this goes in, as long as obviously our threaded holes are facing those holes there. And we're going to bolt up from underneath and then through there. Okay, step 15, we're going to secure that front door to the hinges here on the front. If you haven't already, it's a good time to remove this plastic. And so we're going to use 4 more of those M4 by 12 screws that we just used for the handle. And I'm just lightly tightening these until I get all of them in, and then I'll give them one final kind of torque down, just once I've got everything aligned. So for step 16, they tell you you're going to cut some sealing strips. So this bundle here is this kind of rubber gasket material. It comes out of the same box you've been getting all your screws out of, which is A5. And they give you the lengths in millimeters that you're going to cut the sections of this long coil here. But essentially, there are some little ribbed lines here, hopefully you can see them, and those lines face outside of the enclosure. This is going to go between the plastic panel and the extrusion in that gap to kind of fill the void. So I'll show you the first strip on the bottom here. So I haven't yet cut this, but I'll just demonstrate. You can see those ribs on this side, and the other side is mostly flat. There's only one little bump. So these ribs and this little top ledge piece are facing the outside. They're going to face the plastic panel. And we're just going to tuck this in the gap. So you can see as I press on the panel, there is a little bit of a gap there. So while you're pressing on the panel, just tuck that into that void. Okay, step 17. So the enclosure bag that we dumped out earlier, there was these little tabs like this. Similar ones we attached to the bottom rails of the enclosure earlier on, near the front of the enclosure. And these correspond to those other little tabs. These are going to get slid underneath the handles at the front of the machine. There's a little notch that you can slide them underneath, and they just kind of like hook on like that. Now they're just going to sit on the table. They're not connected physically to the printer, but we will be bolting through the tabs on those bottom rails in the enclosure into these to make sure that the enclosure doesn't shift side to side and contact the printer. But that would still allow us to unbolt those and lift the enclosure off. You'll see those steps in a second, but for now, we're just going to place these underneath the handles. So step 18, we're just going to lift the enclosure onto the printer and kind of align those tabs with the front of the enclosure. I've bundled up all the wires that are hanging out the back here just to make it easier for me. I'll place them on top of the printer here because we want them to go over the back rail, not under the back rail when we lift that on top. I would definitely recommend doing that with 2 people. Okay, step 19, we're going to go into box A6 and grab the cable here labeled Enclosure. And with the little clip here facing out, so not facing the extrusion here, we're going to plug it into the bottom of this box and make sure that there we go, that little clip locks in there, holds it in, and this is just going to drape down the bottom here with the rest of the cables for now. We will be making sense of this and bundling this up in a future step. Step 20, in that same box, A6, there's this large zipper thing. And so this is kind of an alternative to like a nylon braided sleeve for these cables. The instructions for this step is to gather up the cables. I'm just going to do it kind of in order from left to right, and then you wrap this around and then zip it up like you would like a jacket. I'm just going to zip it up a little bit. I know I've got to give a little bit more slack, and I'll maybe zip it up a foot or so for now. In the next step, 21, it does talk about adding a retaining bar here and making sure that these yellow stripes are kind of in line with that retaining bar. So don't zip this up all the way, that way you can still slide these in and out. So step 21, we're going to install this bar. So this bar came from box A5, and we're going to secure it with two M5 by 30 screws, which I have here now. So this bar here has a couple different slots in it, and the manual tells you what cables are meant to go through which slots. So this is just for other cables, so working from left to right on the printer, any cables that we don't identify go here. Then we have the X-axis cable, so that's the one that runs up the left side. We're looking at the back of the printer, so up the left Z tower. We're going to slide it through there and make sure that the yellow stripe on it is poking out here. And then we have the heated bed cable, which we haven't talked about. So we have to go to our cable box and grab the heated bed cable, which I have here. So that cable box was A6. We're going to install that even if we're not using 3D printing right now, just so that we have that available to us. And then from there, we have the tool head cable. That's going to go in this slot here. And then this one currently is showing as empty. So I've got them routed through where the manual says they're supposed to go. So other cables, this makes me wish that I didn't install this as per the instructions on the manual. I would not bother putting this on until we've dealt with this, because now all of our wires are all crossed. So in other, we end up having the cable that went up to this module in the back corner. We have the Z both sides, so this one's coming across. We have the Y both sides kind of coming across again. So it's not left to right, which is the order that we zipped up the zipper in. So I would do those in the opposite order now that I've done it once. But we have all of those other cables that are not defined over here. And then we have, as I said, we have our X, we have the heated bed cable right there. We have our tool head cable right there. And I've made sure that none of these wires are being pinched by this when I bolted it down. So we're good to go there. I'm just going to reposition this zipper. So one quick correction, those yellow tabs or the yellow stickers under here are supposed to be underneath this plate, which gives you another maybe centimeter or so of slack on this side. So I've just loosened these screws and adjusted that. But even doing so, the manual shows the X-axis cable, which is this one here, connected to the X linear rail, comes up and down, and the manual shows it going down here and nicely kind of coming out here with this other one. There is definitely not enough slack for that, right? It's routed exactly as shown in the manual, though they seem to have about 6 inches more slack. And I'm a little bit concerned that as our build surface or cutting surface comes back, we can see it's contacting this wire. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And to do that, I would like to pull this way, but I can't because that's in one of those kind of constrained slots for the X-axis. What I do have, though, is a lot of extra slack here between this clip and the axis itself. Now we need enough slack so that that axis can go all the way to the bottom. Now it's not going to go any further than here, really. So we only need a little bit more slack here. And then it goes to the top, which gives us lots of slack. If I pulled this down about 4 inches, as long as this didn't go any further down than, pull it down a little bit. If this axis didn't go any further down than there, then we would be fine. We have lots of slack here. I could pull that a little bit more and take up that slack. So for now, I'm going to just pull this down about 2 inches, 2.5 inches from there. And the next time when we get the tool head on and we bring this all the way to the bottom, we'll just need to watch cautiously to make sure that we've still given this enough slack to reach there. okay? But now with that extra 2 inches of slack, we're tucked well away. It's not going to contact the surface here as it goes back. We could zip tie it to this Z cable here, or a Velcro tie to the Z cable here, just to make sure it doesn't, ever move over that way. But anyway, all that said, that's step 21 complete. Step 22, we're going to get our last acrylic panel here that comes out of box B5, and I've already removed all the protective film from both sides. In box B1, there's both the exhaust fan and the hose connector. And then in our parts box, or tool box here, we have wing nuts. So we have 4 of these wing nuts, and we've got 4 M4 by 35 screws, okay? And so the fan is going to go on the inside. The shroud is going to go, or the hose connector is going to go like this. And then we'll just thread these through and put the wing nuts on the inside, on the opposite side of the fan. So step 23, we're going to connect the fan to this box here. In between the 2 connectors that we already attached, we're going to attach the fan. It only goes in one way, and just make sure that it's all the way in. There, click. These cables are going to get routed down inside this channel, kind of to the bottom here, and they're going to be held in there by what they're calling a cord collecting strip. Now, this particular step doesn't tell you where that strip is. So if you go back in the manual to the beginning where there's the parts list, you'll find that it's in the materials box with the 2 spools of filament. Materials box is B2, and underneath those 2 spools of filament, you'll find this coiled up cord collecting strip. And so we're going to insert this strip into the channel. Should just kind of slide in like that, and then we can press it down all the way here. And then we'll just cut it to the appropriate length once we figure that out. Maybe leave it an inch or so from the bottom to let the cord come out towards the fan. So the end result could look something like that. You could bring this a little bit further down. I'm a little bit high here. Maybe I slide the whole thing down, but it doesn't particularly matter. Step 24, we're going to need 10 M5 by 16 bolts, and we're going to screw in the back panel here. Now the first 2 top bolts here, you can install these, and there's little keyholes cut out of the acrylic panel, so you can hang it on these 2 screws to kind of hold it there while you screw in the rest. So with those, we can just hang this like that. Make sure you're not pinching the wire for the fan or anything. You may want to pull some of that slack up to the top, just so it doesn't get caught in the fan itself. The instructions say to pre-tighten the screws kind of at the corners first, and then work your way around. And I'm not going crazy when I'm tightening it. I don't want to crack the panel, just enough to hold it kind of firmly against the channel. There's no strain or pressures put on this back panel, so just be gentle. Step 25, we're going to go into box A6 and grab the hose and the hose clamp here, and just stretch this hose kind of open. Throw the clamp over top, and then should be able to slide this over here. So I kind of slide and twist, and it tucks itself underneath here to kind of hide the cut, jagged edge, and then bring the hose clamp all the way up here and just tighten this down. So again, like anything where we're clamping onto plastic, you don't need to go crazy here. You need this tight enough so that this hose is not going to slide off the back, and that's not going anywhere. Step 26, in box A1, we are going to find the integrated controller box. This is this guy, that's the front. The manual tells you to put it on the right-hand side of the enclosure, so that's what we've done. Makes it easier to operate the screen if the door is open, otherwise the door would be blocking our access to the left. On the back, we have a bunch of ports for the connectors. And as you can see, they're all labeled. So for example, one of our connectors here is Z, and we would connect it to either of the Zs here. And just make sure that your connector is going in the correct way so that it latches in like that. And so you'll do that for each of the connectors that are coming out of the back of the machine. So this little flashy red button here is the emergency stop button to make sure that in the case of emergency, we have easy access to this button to shut down the whole machine. After I got the cables connected, I realized that I had about 2 feet of extra length on the Y cables here, on both of them. I have about 6 inches of extra length on the Z cables here, on both of those. And then on the tool head cable, it's completely strained. There's absolutely zero slack on that at all. The rest of the cables are within about 3 inches of each other or so. So this extra slack in these cables should be reduced to match the rest of them, and the tool head probably needs a good 3 or 4 inches of extra length to match the rest of them. Kind of odd. I even double checked to make sure I had them oriented correctly, but you remember we saw those little yellow strips that are underneath that retaining clip there. They're obviously in the correct orientation. I'm not sure why that happened, but similar to us finding that we didn't have enough slack on the X cable inside the case there, and I was worried about the bed hitting it. We just have some interesting cable length choices. Step 27, we have these little plugs. These came out of A5. There are 4 of them, and they go on the corners here. So if you look closely at the corner, you'll see an oval hole. That's where we accessed the bolts when we were bolting the bottom frame together. And we're just going to plug them with these to try to increase the air tightness, and it gives it a nice polished look. Step 28, so we need 2 M5x12 bolts. And remember those little tabs, those aligning tabs for the printer and the enclosure right here? We're going to bolt down through the top one into the bottom, just to make sure that the enclosure doesn't kind of shift around or anything. So this is one of the tool heads that the Snapmaker Artisan came with, and it came with the 3. We've got the laser engraver, the CNC router, and then we've got this, which is a dual extruder 3D printing tool head. And of course, you know, we 3D print on a heated bed, PEI on glass in this case, but we wouldn't be CNC cutting or engraving on that. So at the very least, we need to be swapping the tool head and swapping the print surface or the bottom surface that's attached to the bed there. But there's also some other calibration steps, maybe some software we need to look at. So we're going to make a quick video on setting up each of the tool heads, each of the proper beds for that tool head, and all the other bits you need to get started with each of those tool heads. But for now, we've assembled the entire machine. We've got the enclosure done, all of our connectors done. We just have to power this on and, as I mentioned, go through those steps. And I think we'll do 3D printing last because we do a lot of that around here. We're going to play with the other ones first. Hopefully you found this useful though. Remember, like and subscribe and ring that bell to get notified when we upload more videos. Thanks for watching.